Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Wherever you are on this beautiful planet of ours, welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear. This is the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society, and I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thank you for joining the conversation today. We're going to take another dive into the circular economy, this time about how we manage our waste collection and processing systems. The U.S. waste management industry moves more than 290 million tons of municipal solid waste a year. It's a potential trillion-dollar market, yet much of it still runs on paper tickets, clipboards, and spreadsheets. Roughly 10,000 independent haulers handle a significant share of American collection and materials transfer, and they work in a business where a single truck costs $300,000, and profitability depends on route efficiency, yet most of these haulers lack access to the digital infrastructure that other logistics-centric industries adopted a decade ago. Now that society recognizes the immense value in waste, that it's not just something to dispose of as quickly and quietly as possible, but to manage for profitable reuse in a growing circular economy, the waste management industry is in the midst of a vast upgrade. And our guest today is Mike Marmo, the CEO and founder of CurbWaste, an end-to-end operating system built for independent waste haulers. Mike is a fourth-generation waste industry professional. His great-grandfather started in the business, and Mike started his career working at a family transfer station in New York. Then he built his own collection and disposal hauling company called Curbside. And when COVID shutdowns wiped out 3 months of construction-dependent revenue, he pivoted to focus on the software platform his hauling company had built. He sold that hauling business in 2021 and has spent the years since building CurbWaste into a platform that now serves more than 150 haulers across 40 states, from 5 truck family operations to 200 vehicle regional fleets. CurbWaste brings order management, real-time dispatch, route optimization, automated invoicing, driver apps, and e-commerce into a single cloud-based platform. Its CurbPOS point-of-sale system for transfer stations tracks inbound and outbound materials with scale integration and uses weighted averages by material type to generate automated lead diversion reports and Recycling Certification Institute certified documentation. In other words, it helps a hauler qualify for environmental incentives. That gives contractors and developers defensible third-party verifiable proof that their construction waste was actually diverted from a landfill, and that too creates another economic opportunity. The per-load, per-material chain of custody data is what the emerging extended producer responsibility programs that we've discussed many times need, as 7 states now require producers to fund and document the collection, sorting, and recycling of their packaging. So if you put this operating system under the circular economy, you start to track the value flow, and that means more value can be recognized and rewarded. In October, CurbWaste closed a $28 million Series B round led by Socium Ventures. That's the venture capital arm of Cox Enterprises, bringing its total funding to $50 million. The investment is fueling AI-powered business intelligence tools designed to give independent haulers the kind of data-driven decision-making that larger competitors like Waste Management and Republic Services have built in their own proprietary systems. We'll talk with Mike about what it takes to digitize an industry that's resisted technology adoption for decades, how CurbPOS's materials tracking could extend from lead compliance into EPR reporting and regional materials flow planning, and whether a network of independent haulers on a shared platform can become a connective tissue for an emerging circular economy supply chain. And finally, what is AI actually delivering for waste operations today compared to the hype we're hearing? You can learn more about CurbWaste at curbwaste.com. CurbWaste is all one word, no space, no dash, curbwaste.com. So, can a software platform that modernizes independent hauling also help build the data infrastructure for the circular economy? Let's find out right after this quick commercial break. Welcome to the show, Mike. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Doing well. It's a beautiful day here in Southern Oregon, and I know in New York City, you're getting through the snow.
Yes, it's quite cold.
I want to start off with this question, and it kind of goes back to the fact that your great-grandfather started this business or started in this business.
Yeah.
Walk us through the paper and digital processes that recycling operations have been using and how Curb POS changes their day-to-day work.
Yeah, so my family had grown up in this, been in this business. I had grown up in this business. Actually, my first job, I was a scale operator starting in a transfer station. And when I was working there, everything was pen to paper.
Mhm.
We used the traditional scale ticket. We would put it through this, the Epson printer. Um, within that first year of really working there, I started to realize how difficult it was and how much manual work was happening. Um, a lot of the requests that we were getting at that facility, it was a C&D facility. A lot of the requests we were getting were for lead or for something that was related to a regulatory compliance effort.
Mhm.
And to get all that information was fairly difficult. So at that point, I had really understood kind of where the waste industry was relative to the technology around me and my regular day-to-day life. And when I started a waste company and then ultimately ended up, starting a software company, I really saw it at scale, working with a lot of companies around the country that are starting pen to paper or operating off kind of archaic systems. And so when we originally built CurbWaste and then the Curb POS product, which is for the transfer stations and recycling centers, um, we really hyper focused on automating tasks and making sure that everything was as digital as possible for aggregation of data. So I think we're starting to see adoption along the way, and I think the waste industry is progressing. But ultimately, I think a digital experience is necessary, and I think it's for the future of the industry and for the future of the way that we operate in our waste streams. I think it's critical.
When you pivoted from moving trash to selling software, how did that change your view of the system that you'd been working in?
Yeah, so New York obviously is fairly unique. We were operating in the five boroughs, and there are many limitations, regulatory compliance. It's very difficult to navigate logistically. So many people and limited parking, limited space, very tight. So when you're operating in that bubble, you don't have a lot of options on how you have to operate. You have to be really, really
Mhm.
good and really, really pointed. But then once we moved into the software space and we started to see, around the country how people operate, the term I like to use is all waste is local because it really is. We're all fundamentally doing the same thing. We're all picking up garbage. We're all bringing it to facilities. They're processing materials. But the way they do it or the nuances around that workflow are very different depending on where you are. And the example I'll use is like, you have New York City again, that's like a very, kind of tight space, limited space, a lot of people. And then you'll operate, with a company down in Alabama or Mississippi that has a big urban sprawl, and they have different types of issues, different type of problems. And so everybody's trying to do the best they can from a service perspective, but ultimately it really is dependent on where you are regionally. And I think that's where, dynamic software and the ability to be dynamic really provides a lot of value overall.
The old approach to this business was you had a landfill and you had a certain number of years to fill it. And so you
Yeah.
were managing filling a hole rather than extracting value from the waste stream. How have you seen that transition change the focus of the business that you're trying to support with software?
So I think, maybe I can take a step back into the history a little bit.
Great.
To your point, I think, waste used to be volume based. It was very
Mhm.
much like I charge a price per yard, I dump for price per yard, and there was a simplicity in that. But I think it also led to kind of the way that pricing was done, was again, it was very volume and it was very simple.
Mhm.
When the industry moved into weight and it started to weigh materials, and obviously within that, the kind of correlation of commodities being pulled out and the value, global supply chain, um, there was a shift in the industry where some of the waste haulers still were pricing or stuck in a volume based framework, but the facilities were pricing off of tonnage, um,
Mhm.
and it kind of there was an evolution that happened over time. So what you end up seeing is like, if you order a dumpster, for example, and a dumpster has a certain amount of price and allowable tonnage, and then you're pricing off a matrix format for additional tonnage. The industry shifted. There was a shift in the way that the industry actually started to work. So now, what ends up happening in that framework is like some landfills, big facilities, certain markets have a lot of land and a lot of sprawl, and they have big holes with long lifespans. Whereas other markets don't have any landfills or have many landfills
Mhm.
closing because they're running out of space and they're moving to intermodal or they're moving, to again like MRFs. There's been more focus on kind of bringing those materials back into the supply chain. So I think. we're still seeing that shift happen. It's still moving in that direction. And I think, again, like I always say that waste is a utility that's not measurable. And I think that's the main problem. And in order to do this well, you need to have a unit of measurement, a single point of truth. And so that's why I think software comes into play. It's able to aggregate a bunch of data, operational data, but also data that's related to the material and waste streams, and be able to measure what's going on, and then be able to make better business decisions and better, regulatory decisions in the long term.
CurbPOS tracks inbound and outbound materials at these transfer stations. When a truck dumps a load, what's the data capture process and how granular does it get in terms of the materials that you can classify and identify? And then what does that enable in terms of value extraction?
It all depends. It really depends on the market. Some it hits the floor and then it just gets taken out to the next place. So other markets will obviously run it across a belt, put out commodities. So there's something measurable that's happening. I think in the age of technology now, you can do things like material recognition against AI being able to do material recognition and get components of that. Obviously, there's certification bodies like RCI and LEED that are helping to kind of audit and make sure that there's an evaluation period of whatever they're saying they did or whatever they're pulling out of the stream. But the inbound outbound correlation is really what matters, because when you're coming onto the scale and you're getting weighed and you're putting it on the floor, once it hits the belt, we can then take the outbounds and create that mapping of, okay, this amount of material came in that day. This load hit the floor, and then this is what was distributed out. And then we can show you what a recycling rate was. I still think there's more to be done there. I do think that, again, like cameras and AI can measure that at its when it hits the ground, but
Yeah.
but I think the industry is moving in the right direction overall.
Let's step back a little bit from the industry to, let's say, a five truck family operation that's never used anything except maybe QuickBooks to do some invoicing for
Yeah,
their customers and a
yeah.
whiteboard. What does the actual on ramp to Curb POS look like for them? How's it change their business?
Yeah, so I think if you're a hauler, you're going to be on the curb waste product. If you're a transportation, station, you're going to be on the curb POS product. But really around implementation, I think that that's actually a natural point where people start thinking about software as a hauler. You really want to be cost efficient in the early days, and so sometimes software might be outpriced. But I think as you start to grow and you're seeing that incremental growth, what most haulers are looking for at that point is efficiency and visibility. So what software is able to do is it's allow like operationally it's allowing you the ability to be efficient and to be able to
Mhm.
see what's working and what isn't, and then it's also giving you insights into what's measurable, and so that you can keep investing in the things that are working. So that's hard in the waste business overall, but it's a good way to start. When you go through change management, change is hard all the time. Like if you have a process that's working, and it's the kind of old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Mhm.
You hit a certain point where you have to make a decision about what you want. Like, what is the motivating factor of the business? So, are you trying to grow, or are you just trying to maintain where you are? Most people that are entering business and entrepreneurship are trying to grow. So then it
Mhm.
becomes about scale. It becomes about, I need to maximize and focus on the most important thing, and I can't do everything. And eliminating manual tasks allow you to scale more efficiently. So you go through the buying process and you find the right fit for the software that you need in the moment of which you need it, but you also need to consider what you can scale into as you grow. And then you go through a process of entering orders, getting training the drivers, training the staff, making sure everybody understands how the system works. And then there's a transition period. When we stick with them, we make sure that everything is going the way that we hoped it would go, what the project plan said, and you're supporting them along the way. But at a certain point, the system is running for you, and then they're off to the races and they continue to scale.
One of the major changes in the industry that's driving this transition is the introduction of extended producer responsibility laws, which require, for instance, you're measuring material type, the weight, its
Yeah.
recyclability, and whether it's recycled, and getting verification of that diversion from landfill. Was that in your head when you started thinking about developing CurbOS, or is this an opportunity that's just sort of emerged conveniently at the same time?
100%. When we got into this, the grander vision was the interconnectivity of the supply chain from a data
Mhm.
perspective. So, the way I kind of like to normalize it is you have a generator, you have a collector, a hauler, you have a disposal site, and then ultimately end use, right? But it's end of life. So does it go back into the supply chain through circular economy? Does it, end up in the hole? Whatever that is, there's usually that period of time where it kind of goes, the life cycle has ended. Um, so the way we thought about it was, well, where can we focus on energy from a software perspective? I view the haulers and the transfer stations and the disposal centers as the core of the data set. So we really want to be hyper focused on aggregating data and providing value in those areas. But ultimately, the idea was to interconnect the generation piece to the rest of it. So when we started, we really stayed focused on that part, the collector and the disposal. But now we're starting to migrate into the generator piece to really connect the data sets. And to your point, show where material is being generated, how it's being generated, where it's going, and ultimately where it ends up. That's the measurement of the utility. That's the waste meter. And that's what we're trying to achieve.
We've had a number of sorting and hauling folks on the show, as well as a lot of other thinkers on this topic of the circular
Yeah.
economy. So, building on this reality in which you've got verification that materials have been moved to a particular place and at a particular pace, do you imagine it's possible to actually plan regional material flows to really turn the circular economy on in its full flower?
Yes, I do. It's a lofty goal. A lot has to happen, but I do believe that that's possible. And the analogy I like to use is something like Amazon. Amazon was able to understand from a retail component, like what buyer behavior was. They were able to leverage data around buyer behavior. And then they were able to integrate themselves into the supply chain, the freight forwarding, the warehousing, the ultimately last mile delivery. Um, and they do it so well. The reason why you're able to get something in the same day is because, they were able to connect all those pieces and
Mhm.
understand the output. I believe that the waste industry can achieve that. And so that was a core part of what we are trying to do. You have to walk before you run. You can't do everything all at once. And again, this is a business, right? Like if I sign up a hauler and I can't run their business, and the workflows are you have to build a foundation before you build the house, then it doesn't matter. But I think long-term vision is the ability to do exactly what you just said.
Millions of people come to Earth 911's database to find out what to do with specific materials. And one of the things they're interested in is getting the right material to the right place so that it is actually recycled. And
Yeah.
what you just described in the context of Amazon, for instance, should we not be thinking about putting everything in a single bin, but could we, in an economically viable way, actually have specialized collection that
Yeah.
would produce a cleaner load?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I saw as a waste hauler that I struggled with was we're making decisions, whether regulatory or whether it's, just in general, like if you're trying to be a good actor and try to do the right things, but it's not rooted in much data. And
Right.
so what I tried to say was, well, if we can't measure it, then how do you action it? And I think the first step, like the first thing that everybody should be paying attention to is how do we measure this? Like, what are
Mhm.
we actually looking at? What is the scope of the effort? I don't think anybody could tell you that. But I think there are ways to do it. And I think as you have we like to refer to ourselves as a system of action. You have to have a single point of truth. And when you have a single point of truth, you can then make action against it. So data is the most important thing right now. Like data aggregation is the most important thing. To your point, you did say something that's really important that I think gets missed as well, which is it has to be economically viable. There has to be
Yeah.
ROI associated. And so a lot of times what ends up happening is you get a compliance or a regulatory effort that doesn't really take into account the business criteria. And then people are resistant to it because the business
Mhm.
still has to run. It's a for-profit entity. We want to take the opposite approach. We want to provide value and find ROI in the haulers, work alongside them, work along the transfer stations, work along with the landfills, understand how they're thinking about their business, and really get down into the KPIs of their ROI, and then funnel that back up to the generators and say, here's how they make money, here's what's valuable to them. How can we work together to make that make sense? I think there's a way to do that. And it's just about visibility. It's transparency, it's visibility, it's getting people on the same page and working together is really what we need to do.
So here's a hypothetical. Let's say
Sure.
you look to the one organization in the world right now that has the greatest visibility into what's flowing into homes, and that's Amazon, like we were just talking about.
Yeah.
Could you
Yeah.
partner with Amazon to say, we know you're delivering this much cardboard, this much plastic waste, and so forth into this region, and then plan a hauling solution in response to that?
That's right. That's the end goal. That's probably the last step, the last piece of the puzzle, but that's exactly what you want to do. Waste is being created when it's being manufactured, right? Like
Hmm.
ultimately when it starts at that point is when we know what the waste stream is going to look like. But again, if you have nowhere for it to funnel in and you have nowhere to measure it, it's disjointed. You have to have an integratable solution to be able to even do that. So yes, that is the goal, but ultimately we have to start at the foundational level.
We're moving to a more planful economy, and there's a lot to unpack in that idea. Let's take a quick commercial break. We're going to come back to this fascinating conversation, folks. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Sustainability in Your Ear. Let's return to my discussion with CurbWaste CEO Mike Marmo. He's a fourth generation waste industry veteran whose AI augmented Curb POS system automates recycling operations. So, Mike, until recently, the waste management industry has been resistant to digitization. Let's just put it that way. And there's a massive change ahead. What do you see in terms of a new generation of leadership and the way they think emerging as this industry grows?
Yeah, I think tech adoption in general runs through cycles, right? You have your early adopters, people that see the value. Usually that's someone that understands that they have to differentiate themselves against the market. I was that at one point. When you're
Mhm.
competing with $200 in New York, you have to figure out a way, right? Tech for me was the way that I differentiated myself. So you start with those, and what you're really doing is you're proving the ROI. You're proving you're building case studies around, okay, this is providing value in this particular area, but you're also identifying the meaningful pain points of what they're experiencing. I think a lot of times, like, if you talk to a waste hauler, maybe generally they'll say, like, things are working. But if you really get down into, like, pull back the layers, there's
Mhm.
always a pain point. There's always something they're trying to solve for. But when you see margins shrinking, you have to either try to drive net new revenue or you have to be able to save in a certain area. So then what ends up happening naturally is that, the people start paying attention and they say, okay, this person's growing, they're growing 30% year over year. What's driving that growth? And eventually you get adoption in that way. You get that mass adoption. But some people don't want to take the risk. They want the other people to take it first and have that proof point. But then it kind of accelerates, and that's when you start to get into that hyper growth, hyper adoption phase. I think we are very, very close to that. I think what's happening is people are paying attention to what's going on. From a tech perspective, it is moving at hyperspeed at this point, and so the
Mhm.
world is evolving at such an incredibly fast rate that anybody that doesn't adopt will ultimately fall behind at some point. So I think the waste industry historically has been a little behind, but I don't anticipate that being the case for the long term.
When you raised your Series B, you said that you wanted patient capital that understands that this industry won't transform overnight.
Yeah.
And in the context of what you just said about everything changing at hyperspeed, why patient? And how does that transformation happen in practice? And what do you see as the timeline?
It's pretty simple. I think I alluded to this earlier. You have to build the foundation before you build the house. You can't build the
Mhm.
roof first, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to build the foundation. And a lot of waste haulers, you have a varying degree of waste haulers around the country that are like 2 to 3 truck operations all the way up to 30,000 fleets, right? So you have to meet them where they are. Like if you cannot run the business for them in a meaningful and impactful way, then you've already failed. There's nothing that you can do that will really help them unless you pick a niche part of their business. And we have a lofty goal of being an operational management system. We want to be able to run the entire business on the platform. So you have to start there. And when I say patient capital, is that there's a lot of effort that goes into building those workflows, not just surface level, but very
Mhm.
adding depth, adding nuance and depth to make sure the system is dynamic but rigid. You don't want data to be wrong and you don't want it to get convoluted, but you want it to be dynamic enough to meet the need of the market. So that takes time. You have to learn, you have to listen, you have to pay attention to what's going on. You have to be a really, really good partner to the waste hauler. They have to trust you and believe in you. So that part of it is like the first, step into the rest. But in conjunction with that, then you have to be forward looking. You have to be looking at the things that they're not paying attention to, the things that they
Mhm.
don't know, because they're in the weeds dealing with, the day to day. They're dealing with servicing their customers. They're dealing with the community. They're dealing with building the business. They're focused on what they need to focus on. So it's our job as a tech partner to be able to say, this is where the industry is moving. Here's what this is going to lead to. Here's the vision, and hopefully get people to sign up to that and believe in that. So when we brought on a partner, we articulated that. I think a lot of times when you bring on venture capital or any funding, they're expecting this major hyper growth. But if you want to achieve what we've been speaking about thus far, you need to get things right, and you need to make sure that you're building the foundation correctly.
You're leaning into AI. Does that mean that you're training models to become an expert in managing waste or hauler process? Where's the focus of your training?
It's really in a couple different areas. I think what we really preach out there in the market is we AI for the sake of AI means nothing. Like AI
Mhm.
is cool, it's great, it can provide you really meaningful value in certain areas of your life, and I think it's going to be transformative without a doubt. But in our industry, waste haulers don't like they don't really care about necessarily putting something in because it's flashy and nice and cool. They want it to provide value. And so when we think about AI, we think about manual tasks, we think about repeatable tasks, we think about infinite scale, areas of their business that we're solving an immediate pain point or that they can scale with for the remainder of time because that thing is going to happen all the time. So an example of that would be like, how are we ingesting orders from multiple channels to create efficiencies? How are we setting up comm centers? How are we transcribing phone calls for customer support and customer success? And then I think what you're referring to on the learning side is the gluing of traditional machine learning and algorithmic types of optimizations, for example, like route optimization, gluing it to historical behavior and being able to say, here's the nuances. Here's when the person never puts their garbage out on time. Here's where this street is closed, but it doesn't show you that in the map. There's just certain things that dispatchers know, that tribal knowledge, that they understand their market, that an algorithm is not going to understand. And that's
Yeah.
where AI can layer in and learn behavior and then make better recommendations. So it's not an overnight thing. You have to have the data. It's only as good as the data. So we're really focused on the infrastructure architecture, making sure that we're aggregating that data appropriately, and then learning on that data in order to make sure that we're giving them the best option for success or the best decision-making process or the most optimal insight that we can provide.
So what's an example of an AI-driven recommendation that one of your haulers has used to make a decision that they wouldn't have otherwise?
Yeah, I think operationally or just like anything that we can do that's like kind of AI powered.
One that was a material difference for the hauler.
Yeah.
What do you point to as an example to when you're talking to other haulers?
Yeah, let's. I mean, I'll probably say two. I think first, let's just talk about we've talked about change management. I think right now internally, I think we're really hyper focused on making sure that we can create a really nice change management experience of adopting software. So we do a ton around AI data migrations, so that when we're taking data out of a system, we're able to map it in a quick and easy way that they can understand it, but also do structured cleanups of that data to make sure that they're getting what they want into the new system. It seems like a small thing, but it's a very challenging thing when you're going
Mhm.
through a long change management process. So that's an immediate impact to the hauler that they feel more comfortable in that change. The second thing is anything agentic that we build is going to provide value to the pain point that they're trying to solve for. So whether that's migrating data from one place into another, so being able to take data out of a CRM or being able to put it into an ERP, um, meaningful value. You've just eliminated a manual task that they would have to do over and over and over again. That's repetitive, that's manual, and it's apply. So it's a really good method in providing ROI because you can just say, like, that work is never going to be done again. That worker, that agent will work in that and do that for you with conviction. But I think longer term, like things like we talked about, service verification, material recognition, route optimization, those are efforts that we have to make meaningful investments in that'll be coming down the pike.
As I listen to your description of this, and I think about the U.S. recycling system, which is, as you've pointed out, filled with small private recyclers and haulers, they're looking for ways to plug into, for instance, the growing extended producer responsibility infrastructure that's emerging around us.
Right.
I'm reminded of eBay. Is Curb Waste aiming to become a marketplace layer where those independent operators can begin to identify and plug into broader materials flows?
It's on our radar. Like I said, I think we a marketplace to me again is really indicative of the behavior and the learning and understanding what's going on. So right now, core focus is just visibility. I think we
Mhm.
have to create the transparency layer first before anything else. But yes, I would say like a marketplace, the ability to understand who's best, like RCI is a great example. I mean, RCI, when you're partnering with lead and you're trying to find RCI facilities to establish those lead points, that's an area where we can help and say, this facility's in this area. Partner, we're driving revenue for our customer base. We're saying this RCI facility is on our platform. We can measure it. We can automate that process. We can get that lead report to the right person in the right moment and give that level of visibility through dashboards or anything that we're building at a customer facing level. Again, that's work that doesn't have to be done manually. That's something that can happen in automation. That's probably the first natural step, and we are doing some meaningful work with RCI and lead. But long term, I think, yes, to your point, I think we want to get to a visibility layer, a waste meter layer for anybody and anybody that wants it.
That transparency that you're describing is going to be particularly important to producer responsibility organizations, the entities that are standing up to fulfill EPR requirements. Are
Right.
you talking with them about how you can facilitate the management of their specific materials?
Yes, we are very much in discovery and in conversation with people that are obviously interested and incentivized to want to work with us and try to achieve this vision. So we do talk to people and we do try to understand like what visibility do they want, what would they love to see, what is a utopian point of view. I mean, product is always something that we're always forward looking, right? What's being built today is actionable. It's already been validated. Now it's about what are we going to build in the future. We're probably talking a few years down the road. Like I
Yeah.
think we still have a lot to do on the workflow side, but yes, we are always keeping these teams informed and making sure that they're aligned with where we're going.
You've raised 50 million to date. Do you see a substantial amount of capital sitting out there waiting for this efflorescence of data visibility to take hold so that they can begin to mine the material value in the economy?
Yes, our Series B was led by the venture arm of Cox Enterprises, and it was a very big part of their thesis. They saw the vision, they aligned with it. We were able to move quickly, but it really was rooted in the fact that they've been seeking this type of solution internally. They've been trying to figure out how to get more visibility into their own efforts as it relates to sustainability. So yes, I think we will continue to build. We have to fund the business in order to build the products and achieve the dream that we want to. We do believe that this can be a very big business, but ultimately we are still aligning on that mission statement and that vision of giving the true visibility and measurement of the waste industry.
We've been looking kind of over the horizon without a clear time frame, but let me ask you this. In 10 years, will we have an AI-enabled circular economy running, or will it still be in the process of being constructed?
I think it will be there. Yeah, in 10 years, I think it will be there. I think, what I know internally of where
Mhm.
we are not that far off. We have spent the last 4 years on the workflows. We are starting to see the data benefit of that. I think in the next 10 years, we will 100% have it.
So how does that change the economy of the United States?
That's the part that I'm not 100% sure. I've been operating under the mission statement of this dream and this vision. I do think that it's going to ultimately make us rethink how we think about waste. I used to, you have electricity, right? You can measure it. You can go onto your portal and see how much you're consuming. You can measure water. You can measure all the things that you're using on a day-to-day basis. The waste industry is a core part of our infrastructure. It's a core part of our society. Like, you can even look historically and say, like, when waste stops getting picked up, it can crumble a society, it can crumble a city. I mean, New York City went through that in their strike,
Yeah.
and recently in Boston, they went through it. So there's meaningful implications to the societal impact that waste has. And sometimes I think that gets taken for granted. And I think what we really want to focus on is showing that. Getting all the waste haulers in our community, which I really think we're building, is a really great community of waste haulers that are forward thinking, that want to be a part of that mission and try to show people how critical this industry is, and also all the things and all the information and insights that can come out of it. So, yeah, it's very mission driven. It's a very personal journey. It's a very mission driven journey. But ultimately, I think we have to break it down into its parts, phase out what the goals are, and then get to a point where we can show people how important it actually is.
This is a huge vision. How can our listeners keep track of your part of the story?
Well, I mean, obviously, we post whatever we have to post on our website. So that's a good place at curbwaste.com. But also, anybody can reach out to us. I mean, we are very much trying to be an advocate of the industry. And we're very much trying to be people that can be thought leaders and really speak about what we're trying to achieve here. We're very transparent. We're very honest. We're very true to who we are. So we love interacting with people in the space. We have people come to our office often. We have people talk to our team often. So for me, it's reach out on LinkedIn, reach out on the website. You can reach out on any means necessary.
Mike, thanks very much. This has been a really, really interesting conversation.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me.
Welcome back to Sustainability in Your Ear. You've been listening to my conversation with Mike Marmo. He's CEO and founder of CurbWaste and a fourth generation waste industry professional who's building the CurbPOS system, an end-to-end operating system for independent waste haulers. You can learn more about the company and its work at curbwaste.com. CurbWaste is all one word, no space, no dash, curbwaste.com. Mike said something during the conversation that I encourage you to sit with. Waste is being created when it is being manufactured. Now, that's a deceptively simple observation, and it reframes everything with regard to how we think about the leftovers of the take, make, waste economy. The moment a product rolls off the line, its waste stream is determined. Its packaging, what you need to do with it, the end of use disposition of the product itself, and the materials that will need to be collected, sorted, and either returned to the supply chain or, unfortunately, sometimes buried in a hole. If you can accept that premise, then the waste management industry isn't simply a downstream result of the current economy. It's a mirror that we need to look into to see the potential value to be recovered next week, next month, next year, or decades from now, when materials can no longer serve their current purpose. Mike also pointed to what happens when waste stops moving. In 1968, New York's sanitation workers walked off the job for 9 days, just 9 days, and 100,000 tons of garbage piled up chest high on sidewalks. Rats swarmed into the city's best neighborhoods, and New York declared its first public health emergency since the 1931 polio epidemic. And just last summer, when Teamsters struck against Republic Services in the greater Boston area, trash went uncollected for more than 2 months across 14 communities. Dumpsters overflowed behind restaurants, the rodent population exploded, and schools faced the start of their school year buried by rotting waste. As Mike put it, when waste stops getting picked up, a society can crumble. And that fragility reveals something profound about society's relationship with the materials from which it is constructed. We've built a civilization on the assumption that waste must disappear, that it's someone else's problem, and that it is best put out of sight and kept out of mind. We've treated waste as dirty, shameful, and beneath notice. That cultural contempt has real economic consequences because it means we've systematically underinvested in the infrastructure that manages the material afterlife of everything that we produce and consume. Now, just imagine what happens when waste is no longer something to dispose of, but something that it's important to recover. When the 290 million tons of municipal solid waste moving through U.S. systems each year is finally understood not as a cost center, but as part of the supply chain, a feedstock stream worth tracking, optimizing, and monetizing with the same sophistication we bring to any other logistics challenge, that's when the world Curb Waste wants to enable and its staggering economics will come into being. Accenture Research projected that the circular economy could generate $4.5 trillion in additional economic output by 2030 and as much as $25 trillion by 2050. The United Nations Development Program has endorsed that same $4.5 trillion figure, noting that the transition would simultaneously cut emissions, create stable jobs, and open new green markets all over the world. Market analysts are converging on figures that describe an enormous circular economy. King's Research projects it will reach nearly $2.9 trillion by 2031, while a more conservative estimate from Next Move Strategy Consulting, which pinpoints $1.3 trillion in projected value by 2030, so that even the lowest projections represent a doubling or tripling of the current waste market's value in just 5 years. The point is that we're dramatically underinvesting relative to the opportunity. CurbWaste's Curb POS is just getting started on the path to connecting waste generators to local haulers, closing the loop that Mike described from the point a product is manufactured to the end of its life and ideally back into the supply chain. Mike's Amazon analogy is the right way to frame this. Amazon took the time to understand buyer behavior first when they were just selling books, and then they connected warehousing, freight forwarding, and last mile logistics based on the knowledge of the consumer's needs. The waste industry can follow the same logic. Identify what's being generated, where it flows, and where it ends up, ready for collection. Then the challenge is plugging the myriad gaps in our collection infrastructure by connecting independent operators, new startups, to materials that they can monetize using a shared digital infrastructure. Right there, you can see the necessary transparency layer, the marketplace layer that turns a fragmented collection system into the connective tissue for a circular supply chain. And that's the signal that can transform waste into value. And that will drive new revenue for state and local collection and processing companies under extended producer responsibility programs and ultimately lead to planned regional materials flows that citizens don't pay for, that companies exploit because it's profitable. So when waste stops being considered the dirty result of our consumption and starts being recognized as valuable, when society looks at what it throws away with the same interest it brings to what it buys, we will have a fundamentally different relationship with the material world, one that recognizes that the people who move and manage our waste are operating a utility as essential as electricity or water. And that's the story that we'll help unfold and explore here on Sustainability in Your Ear. So stay tuned. And folks, would you take a moment to check out our archive of more than 540 episodes of Sustainability in Your Ear? We're in our sixth season, and I guarantee you there's an interview that you'll want to share with one of your friends. Writing a review on your favorite podcast platform will help your neighbors find us. Folks, you're the amplifiers that can spread more ideas to create less waste, so please tell your friends, your family, and coworkers. They can find Sustainability in Your Ear on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or whatever purveyor of podcast goodness they prefer. Thank you for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Sustainability in Your Ear, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.